He hadn't opened that front door for anyone in 3 years, until a stranger collapsed on his porch in the middle of a storm, pregnant, barefoot, and carrying 2 shivering little girls who weren't even her own. What happened next would change not only his life, but the heartbeat of an entire town. If stories of unexpected grace and the quiet power of kindness move you, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. We tell true-to-heart tales where love always finds its way home. Now, settle in. The story you're about to hear is one of second chances, silent prayers, and the night the stars began to fall. The wind on the hill sang the same mournful song every night. It scraped the naked branches of aspen trees, rattled loose tin on the barn roof, and whispered through the cracks in the walls of Daniel Cale's cabin, like a memory trying to find its way home. Once, this place had held laughter, thick stew bubbling on the hearth, the rhythmic creak of a rocking chair, and the gentle melody of a woman's voice reading stories aloud to a little boy with hair the color of summer wheat. That was before the mine took her, before silence moved in like fog and stayed. 3 winters had passed since the accident, but the silence remained. The only sounds in Daniel's world now were the wind, the creak of old wood, and the occasional shuffle of small feet. His son, Noah's feet. Noah hadn't spoken since the funeral, and Daniel had stopped waiting for words long ago. Daniel was a man of quiet endurance. His beard had grown wild, around a face carved by grief and time, his eyes the color of frost after midnight. He lived by routine, splitting wood, tending the stubborn garden, repairing what few tools he had left. He moved with purpose, but not with hope. Nothing had grown around him since that day. Not the crops, not his boy, not his heart. That evening, the sun slunk behind the ridge, casting a dull copper glow over the hill. Daniel stood on his porch with a chipped enamel mug of weak coffee in hand, staring past the skeletal trees. A strange shimmer hovered above the horizon. Then, as if called by a name only heaven knew, a single star pulled itself free from the sky. It streaked down, silent, beautiful, and gone in an instant. He didn't believe in signs, not anymore. Inside, Noah sat cross-legged on the rag rug, turning the same picture book he'd held every night for 3 years. He couldn't read it, had never learned how, but he held it like a keepsake. It had been his mother's favorite, and now it was his anchor. His eyes, a mirror of Daniel's, lingered on a page with a house drawn on a hill not unlike their own. Daniel watched from the doorway. The boy didn't speak, didn't look up. He simply turned the page. The knock came just past midnight, soft, uncertain, but undeniable. Daniel froze. No one knocked on his door. Not here. Not in winter. Not ever. He opened it to a blur of shadow and snow. A woman stood there, or rather, slumped there, clutching the doorframe with one hand, the other wrapped protectively around her pregnant belly. Her face was pale and streaked with wet hair. Her coat hung open, soaked and torn. Behind her, clinging to each other in the darkness, were 2 little girls in matching, threadbare coats. Twins. No older than 4. "Please," the woman whispered, and then collapsed. Daniel didn't think. He dropped the coffee cup and caught her just before she hit the porch. She was frighteningly light in his arms. The twins didn't cry. They didn't speak. They only stared, as if waiting for someone to tell them what to do next. Noah appeared behind him, silent as snow, and without hesitation, he walked up to one of the girls and took her hand. Daniel blinked. Inside, the fire was still warm. He laid the woman on the sofa, her breath shallow but steady. He wrapped the twins in blankets and set a pan of milk on the stove. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. In the lamplight, Daniel studied her face. Mid-30s, maybe younger, but worn by fear and exhaustion. Her lips moved faintly, but no words came. Her hands never let go of her belly. The twins curled near the hearth like two sleepy kittens. One of them held Noah's hand, and Daniel swore, for a moment, he saw a flicker of peace in the boy's eyes. He sat up all night. He watched the fire crackle low. He listened to the wind moan outside and the soft breathing of strangers in his home. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel so absolute. When morning came, the snowfall had begun. Slow, gentle, relentless. And inside his chest, where the cold had lived too long, something faint began to thaw. When Rose finally stirred, the fire had burned down to a warm glow, and the smell of wood smoke lingered in the still air. Her eyelashes fluttered like the wings of something fragile, and her breath came in shallow gasps, as if even waking up required more strength than she had to spare. Daniel had not moved from his chair. He watched her quietly, his eyes catching the way her hand instinctively curled over her belly as she shifted. A mother's reflex, protective even in unconsciousness. She opened her eyes slowly and blinked against the flickering light. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She took in the room, rough wooden walls, the low ceiling, the worn rug, the fire. And then her gaze landed on him. "You're not with the others," she said hoarsely, her voice a dry whisper. Daniel didn't know who the others were. "I live here," he answered simply. Her eyes darted past him, toward the hearth. The two little girls were asleep on a folded quilt, one tucked under Noah's arm like they belonged there. "They're safe," he added. "They had warm milk, slept through the night." Her shoulders dropped in relief. She tried to sit up, but a sharp wince stopped her. Daniel reached forward on instinct, but pulled his hand back before he touched her. "Easy," he said. "You've been out cold for hours. You need rest." She nodded, her throat working around the effort to stay composed. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would open the door." Daniel stood, crossed the room, and poured a tin cup of lukewarm tea from the pot by the stove. He handed it to her, and she drank it slowly, her hands trembling slightly. "My name's Daniel Cale," he said, voice even. "That's my son, Noah. He doesn't talk, not since—" He didn't finish the sentence, didn't have to. "I'm Rose," she said softly. "The girls, they're Lila and June." He waited. She didn't say more. "What happened?" he asked. Her eyes dropped to the cup in her hands. "We were part of a wagon train heading north. After my husband was killed, they said we slowed them down. Said I brought bad luck. Too many mouths to feed. Too much weight." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He'd seen it before, how hardship stripped people of kindness. "They left us 3 nights ago," Rose continued. "Said someone would find us, that I'd manage." Her voice cracked then. "I thought I could." Noah stirred slightly in his sleep, his hand still resting lightly against Lila's arm. The fire cast a soft halo around the children. Daniel looked at her again. Her skin was still pale, her lips cracked. She was running on nothing but will. "You walked here?" he asked. "Mostly rode, until the wagon's wheel snapped. Then we walked." She swallowed hard. "The girls were so cold. I didn't know where we were going. I just saw the light in your window." For a long moment, neither spoke. Daniel stood, went to a high shelf, and pulled down a jar of soup he'd canned months before. He poured it into a pot and set it on the stove, the scent of herbs and potatoes filling the room. As it heated, he fetched clean towels and left them folded beside the couch. "You'll need to stay here for a while," he said, more as a statement than a suggestion. Rose looked at him, unsure. I don't want to be a burden." Daniel shook his head. "You're not." A silence passed, one that didn't ache like the ones before. Then she whispered, "You don't even know us." "I don't need to." She smiled faintly. It was a tired smile, but real. One hand reached out and gently brushed Lila's curls back from her forehead. The fire crackled softly behind them. After a while, she fell asleep again, cup still in hand. Later that day, Daniel stepped outside to chop wood, the chill wind biting at his neck. He didn't get far. When he turned back, he saw something that rooted him to the spot. Noah was kneeling beside June and Lila, showing them how to fold paper into stars, the way his mother once taught him. They listened carefully, mirroring his movements, and when they finished, the three of them held their crinkled stars up to the firelight, proud and glowing. Daniel hadn't seen Noah smile in 3 years, but there it was, faint, uncertain, but unmistakable. A ripple passed through Daniel's chest, not pain, not grief, something gentler, something that felt dangerously close to hope. That night, after the children were asleep, Daniel sat by the fire while Rose watched him from the couch, eyes half-lidded, the color returning to her cheeks. "I don't know how to repay you," she said. "You don't have to. You barely hesitated. You didn't ask questions." Daniel sipped his coffee and stared at the embers. "When the mine collapsed," he said slowly, "there were men who walked away. Men who didn't look back. My wife was trapped. Noah was just a baby. Some folks said it wasn't worth digging through the rubble, said it was too late." His voice tightened. "But someone stayed. Just one man. He dug with his bare hands, found Noah alive under a beam. He didn't ask questions either." Rose said nothing. The quiet wrapped around them like a blanket. "I figure," Daniel said, his voice lower now, "if someone could save my boy when no one else would, then maybe I ought to be the kind of man who does the same." Rose's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. Outside, the snow fell in whispers. Inside, the house had never felt so full. The storm passed slowly, like an old sorrow making its last lap around the hill. Outside, snow piled up along the window frames and bowed the naked branches of trees. But inside the cabin, warmth lingered. In the fire, in the scent of fresh-baked cornbread. And, most unexpectedly, in the hush that no longer felt empty. It had been 4 days since Rose and the girls arrived. Daniel found himself caught in the quiet rhythm of a new kind of routine. He chopped extra firewood, kept water boiling on the stove, and began checking on the children without realizing he was doing it. There were small sounds now that filled the space, the giggle of Lila when June tickled her, the soft hum of Rose singing as she cleaned a pot, and Noah's steps, more certain, more curious than before. Daniel noticed it most in the mornings. Noah would wake early and tiptoe into the main room, where Lila and June were often already whispering over dolls they'd made from fabric scraps. The boy would sit near them, silent but present, folding paper stars, or just watching. He didn't speak again. Not yet. But the way he moved was different. Less ghost. More boy. And Daniel, though he never said it aloud, had started making 2 extra biscuits every morning, just in case someone asked for seconds. One evening, as the sky turned the color of bruised lavender, Daniel came in from the shed to find Rose sweeping the floor, her belly round, beneath a thick shawl. "You shouldn't be on your feet so much," he said. She smiled without looking up. "I'm not used to sitting still." He set his gloves down on the counter. "Still doesn't mean useless." She paused, straightened up, and leaned lightly on the broom. "Daniel, I don't want to overstep. I know this is your home. You didn't ask for us to be here." "No," he agreed, "but you're here now." He meant it plainly, but something in the way she looked at him after made his chest, feel too small for his breath. "I didn't think kindness still lived in men like you," she said softly. Daniel didn't know how to answer that, so he reached for the kettle instead. They sat together by the fire that night, sipping tea, the girls already tucked in, Noah nestled between them. Rose hummed a melody, a soft, drifting tune with no words, but filled with memory, the kind of tune someone's grandmother might have sung while braiding hair under lamplight. "I know that song," Daniel said quietly. "My mother used to hum it when the lights went out. Said it was older than memory." "Mine too," he said. "Funny. Different lives, same lullabies." The days blurred, and the cabin, once defined by absence, grew into something else. Rose found ways to make even the plainest things feel like home. She strung twine above the stove and clipped small drawings the children made. She tied sprigs of rosemary above the window for luck. And when Daniel came in one afternoon to the smell of baking bread, he nearly forgot the years between the last time that scent filled his lungs. There were changes in him too. He spoke more, not much, but enough for the children to know they could ask him things. Enough that Rose sometimes looked at him like she was waiting for the man behind the silence to fully return. He didn't know how to be that man, but around her, he wanted to try. One night, the girls grew restless with fever. It was a simple chill, Rose said, but worry clung to her features like shadow. Daniel sat beside the small mattress and wiped June's brow while Rose comforted Lila. When the worst passed and both girls slept again, Daniel didn't return to his room. Instead, he sat near the hearth with Rose, both of them watching the embers. "She called me Mama yesterday," Rose said suddenly. Daniel glanced at her. "Which one?" "Lila." Her voice caught. "I didn't correct her." "You shouldn't," he said. "You're the one raising them." Rose turned toward him, eyes glassy but firm. "They're not mine by blood, Daniel. But they're yours by heart. That's the part that matters." In the quiet that followed, something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but understanding. A shared space where two people broken by loss could sit beside each other and realize they might not be so broken after all. When Rose stood to head for bed, she paused and touched his shoulder gently. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not making me feel like a visitor in a life I don't belong to." Daniel couldn't answer. He only nodded, holding her gaze a moment longer than he intended. That night, as snow fell once again outside the window, Daniel sat alone in the stillness and looked around his home. It no longer echoed. It breathed. It held footsteps, laughter, the rustle of children under blankets, the whisper of a lullaby in a woman's voice. And in the very center of it all sat something he hadn't felt in years. Belonging. It was the sound of the mandolin that brought it back. Just a few notes, drifting through the cabin like a memory in disguise. Rose had found it tucked away in a trunk beneath the stairs. An old, dust-covered thing with 3 strings, out of tune, and one missing entirely. But she coaxed music from it anyway, soft and unpolished, like the way wind moves through tall grass. Daniel was whittling near the window when the music started. His hand stilled. The song, it wasn't the same one his wife used to play, but it was close enough to hurt, close enough to stir something deep and rusted inside him. He didn't speak, just listened, heart pounding with the kind of ache that doesn't make itself known until it's touched. When Rose finished, the cabin fell quiet again. Not the brittle silence of grief, but the thick, thoughtful hush of something unspoken. "I didn't mean to bring anything back," she said gently. Daniel looked down at the wooden carving in his lap. It was supposed to be a horse, but the lines were crooked now, the form uneven. "It's not your fault," he murmured. Some things come back whether we invite them or not. That night, the wind picked up, whistling through the eaves. The fire burned low, casting flickers of gold across the cabin walls. The children had already gone to bed, and Daniel stood alone by the mantel, staring at the only photograph he'd kept. It was small, black and white, and worn at the corners. A young woman smiled beside a man who barely looked like himself, clean-shaven, lighter in spirit. The baby in her arms had curls like summer straw. He heard footsteps behind him. "I didn't know you had a wife," Rose said softly. Daniel didn't turn around. "I don't anymore." A pause. "I'm sorry." "She died in the collapse. The shaft gave out. I was supposed to be working that day, but I had a fever. She brought Noah lunch like she always did. She was just passing by when the rock fell." Rose moved closer, her presence gentle but steady. "You couldn't have known. I should have been there." The guilt in his voice didn't rise or crack. It sat heavy and flat, as though it had been carried for so long it no longer had weight, only shape. "She was the best person I ever knew," he added after a moment. "She sang about everything, even the dust on the floor. Made the whole house feel alive." Rose looked around. "She still does," she whispered. They sat by the fire for a long time, saying nothing. Just the occasional pop from a burning log, and the sound of the storm pushing against the walls. Daniel didn't speak again, but Rose didn't press. She only sat with him in that quiet space where grief had a name and wasn't asked to leave. The next morning, a knock at the door startled them both. Visitors were rare. This kind of weather made them even rarer. Daniel opened the door to find Pastor Miller, wrapped in wool and concern. Behind him stood his wife, Martha, holding a small bundle of knitted scarves. "We heard from the store clerk that you had company," the pastor said, his gaze falling to the children who peeked around the corner. Rose stepped forward with calm dignity, chin lifted slightly, one hand resting on her stomach. "I'm Rose," she said. "These are Lila and June. We're not here to stay long, just until the road's clear." Martha's eyes softened. "They're beautiful girls. Twins?" Rose nodded. Pastor Miller looked to Daniel, whose expression remained unreadable. "They're welcome at Sunday service," he said. "You too." Daniel gave a small nod. "Appreciate it." The pastor paused. "If you need help, firewood, supplies, don't be a stranger." After they left, Rose turned to Daniel, arms crossed. "You didn't tell them we're staying longer?" "I didn't think I needed to," he replied. "Do you want us to?" His pause was barely a breath, but it said more than a paragraph. "I'm just saying," she continued, "we're not passing through anymore. You know that." He looked at her then, eyes steady and tired. "I know." That evening, Noah brought Rose a folded piece of paper. It was a crude drawing, 5 stick figures holding hands beneath a sky of stars. One of them had a rounded belly. Another had curls. All of them were smiling. Rose stared at it for a long time. "Did you draw this?" she asked. Noah shook his head and pointed to Daniel. Rose turned to him, stunned. Daniel only shrugged. "Figured the kids ought to know what a family looks like." Her voice caught in her throat. She couldn't speak, so she didn't. She just reached for his hand and held it in silence. Outside, the wind howled across the quiet hill. But inside, within 4 rough wooden walls and 1 warming fire, a family was slowly, stubbornly forming, stitched together by pain, by kindness, and by something that didn't yet have a name, but might one day be called love. It started with the stars. That evening, the sky above the hill stretched wide and clear, a dark velvet canvas scattered with starlight. It was one of those rare Montana nights when the cold air sharpened every glimmer, and even the children's breath seemed to sparkle as they ran, laughing, through patches of frozen grass. Rose had bundled the girls in mismatched wool sweaters and let them run while she sat on the porch steps, cradling her belly with one hand and resting the other against the worn wood railing. Daniel stood nearby, arms crossed loosely, his breath rising in pale ribbons. Noah was perched on a low fence post, eyes tilted toward the sky, the same sky he'd watched for years in silence. But tonight, something flickered behind his gaze. A restlessness. A pull. "He hasn't taken his eyes off the sky all evening," Rose said softly. "He used to sit out here with her," Daniel replied, his voice like a quiet memory. "They'd name stars together. She told him one day he'd find his own." Rose turned her head. "And did he?" Daniel hesitated. "I think maybe tonight." Inside the cabin, bedtime was usually quiet. A few yawns, a blanket tugged up, a soft hum from Rose if one of the girls needed help drifting off. But tonight, as Daniel added a fresh log to the fire and Rose helped June settle into the quilt beside Lila, something felt different. Brighter. Unspoken but heavy with anticipation. Noah knelt beside the hearth, fingers working on another paper star. He had folded dozens of them in recent days, little creased wishes in white and brown, scattered across the mantel, the windowsills, the edge of the dining table. He glanced at Rose, then at the girls, then back to the fire. Rose caught the movement. She tilted her head gently. "Would you like to show them how you make one?" Noah stared at her. The room stilled, and then, without looking away, he nodded. Rose smiled, warmth blossoming on her face. She leaned in, pulling 2 blank sheets from the drawer, and handed them to Lila and June. Noah unfolded a star slowly, carefully flattening it to demonstrate each fold. The girls mirrored him, clumsy but focused, their tongues peeking out as they worked. Then, without warning, Noah spoke. His voice was soft, raspy, fragile like something unused for too long. But it was there, undeniable. "Like this," he said, guiding June's hand to fold the edge more cleanly. "Then turn it." The paper slipped from her fingers in surprise. Rose gasped. Daniel turned from the fire as if pulled by a string. Noah didn't flinch. He didn't notice the silence. His eyes were locked on the paper. "The middle crease matters. It makes the point sharp." Then he looked up and saw all of them staring at him. His mouth closed. Hands froze. Daniel stepped forward slowly, kneeling in front of him. "Noah," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Say it again." The boy's lip trembled. He glanced at Rose. She gave him the smallest nod. Not a command, just permission. Noah swallowed, then whispered, "The middle crease matters." Daniel closed his eyes. His whole body seemed to deflate, like a man who had been holding a breath for 3 long years. Then he pulled Noah into his arms. There were no sobs, no gasping cries, just the quiet, overwhelming release of a father finally hearing the sound he'd longed for in every silent room, every empty dream. Rose felt the tears come, hot and unrelenting, not for herself, but for them, for the sacred, fragile beauty of this moment, a child's voice, a father's healing, a family reshaping itself right in front of her. When Daniel let go, Noah turned and, for the first time since she had arrived, looked directly at Rose. "Thank you," he said, simply, clearly. And then, "I wanted to talk. I just didn't know if I was allowed." The sentence hit her like a swell. She knelt beside him, pressing a hand gently to his cheek. "You never needed permission, sweetheart. You just needed time. And love." That night, after the children had drifted off, Lila curled beside June, Noah clutching his newest star. Daniel and Rose sat by the fire, too full of emotion to speak for a while. When he did, Daniel's voice was quiet but sure. "I thought I lost him," he said. "Not just his voice. Him. I thought maybe the part of him that laughed and talked died with her." Rose stared into the flames. "Sometimes we don't lose people. Sometimes they just go quiet, until someone gives them a reason to speak again." Daniel looked at her. Really looked. "You gave him that." "I just gave him room," she said. "You gave him the roots." They sat in silence after that. But it wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence people share when they know the worst has passed, and something better is beginning. Slowly, shyly, but unmistakably. Later, as Daniel climbed the ladder to check on Noah one last time, he found the boy asleep, hand resting gently on his paper star. On the windowsill beside him was another drawing. 5 figures. One holding a baby. A night sky above them, filled with stars, each one labeled with names. In the corner, in crooked block letters, one word was written carefully. Home. The storm came without warning. By late afternoon, clouds had swallowed the mountaintops like wolves circling prey, and the wind howled across the ridge with a wildness Daniel hadn't felt in years. The temperature dropped swiftly, biting through his coat as he secured the last of the firewood under the awning. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with tension, not fear, but anticipation. Rose had been quiet all day, her face calm, almost serene, but Daniel had noticed the way her hand gripped the edge of the table when she stood, the way she breathed more carefully, the way she winced when no one was looking. He knew. It was time. "I think it's starting," Rose said softly after dinner, her eyes meeting his across the room. Daniel didn't move for a moment. Then calmly, he nodded. "Okay," he said. No panic, no rush, just the steady thrum of resolve moving through him like a deep river. He had helped deliver calves before, even one neighbor's baby when the midwife was snowed in. But this was different. This was Rose. This was the woman who had walked out of nowhere into his life and made everything warm again. And now she was trusting him to hold her steady through the most fragile threshold of all. He guided her to the bedroom, the same room his wife once filled with lullabies and laughter, and helped her sit on the bed. The twins clung to each other, wide-eyed. "Noah," Daniel said gently, crouching to meet his son's gaze. "I need you to look after Lila and June. Keep them calm. Can you do that for me?" Noah nodded. "I'll tell them a story." Daniel's throat tightened at how easily the words came now. "Good man," he whispered. The hours passed slowly. The storm beat against the windows like a drum without rhythm, but inside, the only sound was Rose's breathing. Measured, determined. Daniel boiled water, brought clean linens, wiped her brow. She didn't cry out. She didn't ask for anything. She only gripped his hand. "I'm not scared," she whispered at one point, between contractions. "I know," he said, "but I am." She smiled through the sweat. "You're doing fine." It was the strangest thing, how the roles had reversed. He had taken her in, fed her, protected her. And yet in this moment, it was she who was holding him together. By the time midnight drew close, the storm outside had become a distant roar, and the fire inside was all that lit the world. Then, suddenly, fiercely, the cry of new life tore through the hush like sunlight through a winter cloud. Daniel sat back, breathless, a newborn in his trembling hands. The baby's skin was warm and damp, cheeks flushed red, tiny fists clenched tight like he already knew the world would test him. Rose collapsed back against the pillows, tears sliding from the corners of her eyes. "Is it a girl?" Daniel said, voice breaking. "She's perfect." Rose let out a soft, trembling laugh. "I was sure. I dreamed her name was Hope." Daniel looked down at the child. Hope, he echoed. Yeah, that fits. Later, when the baby had been cleaned and wrapped, and Rose was resting, Daniel stepped into the main room where Noah and the girls had fallen asleep in a nest of quilts. He didn't want to wake them, but the floor creaked, and Noah's eyes fluttered open. It's a girl, Daniel whispered. Her name is Hope. Noah smiled, the kind of smile that starts in the eyes and travels outward like the first warmth of spring. Then he pointed to the window. Daniel turned. The storm had passed, and in its wake, the sky had opened, clear, infinite, studded with stars. One shot across the darkness, brilliant and silent. A new one, Noah said, voice full of awe. Maybe it's hers. Daniel wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders and nodded. Yeah, he whispered. Maybe it is. By morning, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and warm bread. Martha Miller arrived with clean linens and broth, her eyes wide when she saw the baby nestled in Rose's arms. Daniel Cale, she said, hand to her chest. Are you trying to turn this place into an orphanage or a miracle house? He only smiled. Maybe both. Martha leaned in and kissed Rose's forehead. You look like you've always been here. Like this house had been waiting for you. Rose looked down at Hope. Maybe we were all waiting for each other. That night, as Daniel tucked Noah into bed, the boy asked, Did you ever think you'd have a baby in the house again? Daniel thought a long time before answering. No, he said. But then again, I never thought we'd have laughter again, or singing, or stars that had names. He paused. Sometimes life gives you back things you thought were lost, but it brings them in new forms, in new hands, on new nights. Noah nodded, his eyelids growing heavy. Like hope, he mumbled. Daniel kissed the top of his head. Exactly like hope. Spring didn't arrive in a single day. It came slowly, like a cautious friend knocking at the door. The snow melted in hesitant patches, revealing stubborn green beneath. The wind softened. The creek behind the cabin gurgled awake, and with it, something else thawed. Something not in the soil, but in the air between 5 hearts that had learned, quietly, to beat in rhythm. Hope, barely 2 weeks old, had become the gentle pulse at the center of their lives. She slept often, cried rarely, and when she opened her eyes, 2 small, curious orbs the color of fresh rain. Every voice in the room dropped to a whisper, as though they were witnessing something sacred. Daniel found himself drawn to her most in the early mornings. Long before the others stirred, he would sit beside her cradle, listening to her breathe. Sometimes, she reached toward the light pouring through the cracked window, fingers unfurling as if she were catching sunshine. Just like your mama, he'd murmur, though he didn't always mean Rose. One afternoon, Rose took the twins outside to gather wild herbs along the edge of the tree line. She moved slowly but surely, a sling across her chest, holding Hope, as the girls darted ahead like butterflies. Daniel stood on the porch with Noah, watching them from a distance. Looks like they've always belonged here, Daniel said quietly. Noah nodded, folding a strip of bark into a makeshift boat. They make everything feel warmer. Daniel looked down. So do you, son. The boy glanced up, surprised. You've changed, Daniel added, kneeling beside him. You talk now. You smile. You help the girls like you've known them forever. Noah shrugged, but his cheeks pinked. Daniel leaned in closer. You brought that change. Not me. Not even Rose. You did. The words hung in the air like praise and prayer all at once. Later that week, while Daniel repaired the front fence, a sharp giggle rang out from inside the cabin. He froze. Then came another, a tiny bell-like sound that made the birds in the trees pause mid-song. He dropped the hammer and ran inside. Rose stood by the fireplace, cradling Hope. Noah and the twins were gathered on the floor, wide-eyed. "What was that?" Daniel asked breathlessly. "She laughed," Rose whispered, as if afraid to scare it away. Hope laughed. Daniel moved closer, not quite believing. Rose gently brushed her finger against Hope's cheek again, and like a bird startled into song, the baby let out a high, bubbling giggle. It wasn't long or loud, but it was full, whole, real, and it was the first. Daniel blinked hard, chest tight. It had been 3 years since laughter had come from that corner of the house. 3 years since the echo of a child's joy had bounced off those walls like a song returning home. He turned toward Rose. "She has your spirit," he said. Rose smiled. "She has all of ours." That night, Rose and Daniel sat on the porch while the children slept inside, the sky above them brushing shades of gold into indigo. Hope lay in Rose's arms, eyes wide, cooing softly. "I used to wonder if I'd ever hear that sound again," Daniel said. "The laughter?" He nodded. "After my wife died, it was like every corner of this place swallowed joy whole. Even Noah stopped smiling. I thought it was gone forever." Rose shifted slightly to face him. "But it wasn't." "No." He looked at Hope. "It just needed time, and grace, and you." She looked away for a moment, her face suddenly distant. "I've been thinking. Maybe we should go into town soon, introduce the baby, let the girls feel part of the world again." Daniel studied her face. "Are you thinking of leaving?" he asked. Her eyes widened. "No, I meant just for the day." He nodded, but something had already settled heavy in his chest. The idea of her leaving, even just to visit town, was like the return of winter in the middle of spring. "You know," he said slowly, "I never expected this. Any of it. You showing up. These girls. Hope. I didn't expect it either. But now that it's here, he faltered. "I don't think I want to go back to the way things were." Rose held his gaze. "You're not meant to," she said. "None of us are." Later, after she'd gone inside, Daniel stayed behind, staring at the stars. The same sky he used to curse for its silence now blinked with life. Somewhere between all the sorrow and surprise, this place had changed. Not just the cabin, not just the boy. Him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old wedding ring he still carried, his wife's. He'd stopped wearing it long ago, but had never been able to let it go. For the first time in 3 years, he opened his hand and gently laid it to rest on the porch railing. Not forgotten, but finally, at peace. The laughter had returned to the hill, and it didn't ask for permission. It simply came home. It was a Saturday when they finally went to town. The sky was bright, the earth still damp from spring thaw. Daniel hitched the wagon just after breakfast, laying quilts over the benches to soften the ride. Rose packed bread and apples for the children, her hands working with quiet care, her eyes scanning the cabin one last time before they stepped out. It was the first time all 7 of them, Daniel, Rose, Noah, the twins, baby Hope, and a wagon full of fragile beginnings, had left the hill together. Daniel hadn't been to town in months. As they rode along the dirt path, past birches just beginning to bud, he could feel it. Something shifting under the surface. Not dread. Not quite. But the kind of tension a man feels before weather changes. And he wasn't wrong. Main Street looked just as it always had. Trim white church steeple, a row of weathered shops, wagons hitched beside bicycles and muddy boots. But as they rolled in, something turned in the air. People noticed. Heads lifted. Conversations paused. Martha Miller was the first to step forward, smiling warmly, arms outstretched toward the baby in Rose's arms. "Well, would you look at this bunch of light," she said. This little one's already stolen the spring. Others followed, some with kind eyes, some with hesitant glances. But it wasn't long before Daniel felt the change, not in words, but in the slow spread of sideward glances. The way hands pulled children closer, the murmurs that didn't bother hiding themselves. Is that the woman from the Whitman train? Didn't they say she was cursed? I heard her husband was a horse thief. She's not even their mother, you know. Those twins, different blood. The words came like sleet, light, sharp, and cold. Daniel turned slightly in the wagon seat and saw Rose's profile go still. Her jaw didn't clench, her eyes didn't well, but he knew that kind of stillness. It was the kind that came when a person had been hit too many times in the same place. At the general store, Rose remained outside with the children, while Daniel stepped in for supplies. It wasn't long before the whispers followed him through the door. Taking in orphans now, Daniel? Can't say I thought you'd be one to shack up with trouble. Daniel turned slowly, his eyes hard. He recognized the voices, men he'd worked beside years ago, men who used to shake his hand without thinking. I didn't ask for your thoughts, he said, voice low and even. One of them chuckled. Didn't have to ask. It's what folks are already saying. Daniel walked to the counter without another word, paid for the flour and soap, and stepped back into the light. Outside, he found Rose beside the wagon, one hand resting lightly on the twins' shoulders. Her chin was lifted, her expression calm, but her eyes met his, and he saw it. Not fear. Resignation. You heard them, she said softly as he loaded the goods. I did. I've heard worse. Daniel paused, then reached for her hand, gently but firmly. You're not here to outrun what they think. You're here to prove it never mattered. She looked at him, uncertain. He leaned in closer. You're not trouble, Rose. You're the reason this family stands. But the town's whispers didn't end with that day. The next week, a note was left under the wagon seat at church. A good man doesn't raise someone else's mistake. The following Sunday, someone carved a slur into Daniel's barn door. It was Martha who came first, tears in her eyes, begging forgiveness on behalf of a town that had forgotten its manners. It was Pastor Miller who came next, hands folded, asking how he could help make it right. But Daniel didn't want apologies. He wanted something more permanent than sorrow. One Thursday evening, he walked to the front porch, where Rose sat rocking Hope to sleep. The twins were playing beneath the maple tree. Noah was carving another star. I want to say something, Daniel said. Rose looked up. Not to you, to the town. She frowned. Daniel, we don't have to prove. I know, he said. But I want to. Not for them. For Noah. For Lila and June. For Hope. They need to see a man who doesn't bend in the face of cruelty. And you deserve to be claimed in daylight. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she stood and kissed his cheek. That Sunday, the church pews were full. Daniel stepped up at the end of service, cleared his throat, and began. I was once a man who lost everything that gave life color. I walked through this town like a ghost, and no one here blamed me for being broken. He paused. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Now I've found something worth fighting for again. A woman whose kindness saved my son, who gave my house a heartbeat, who took in 2 girls the world forgot and called them daughters. A murmur moved through the congregation. Daniel's gaze swept across the room. If you believe a man's worth is measured by blood, then you haven't seen love do its work. He stepped down without another word. And in the hush that followed, Noah rose to his feet and walked to his side. Then Lila. Then June. Then Rose, baby Hope in her arms. And it was in that stillness, in that fragile golden quiet, that the town began to unlearn its prejudice, and Daniel Cale finally took back his name in full. The idea came from a folded paper star. Noah had been making them again, neatly creased, carefully shaped, as though each one carried a secret too important for words. They were everywhere now, on the windowsills, hanging from threads above the children's beds, tucked into Rose's apron pocket when she wasn't looking. One evening, as Daniel sat carving a toy horse by the fire, he noticed Noah folding a star with deliberate care. But this time, the boy did something new. He wrote a word inside before sealing the last fold. The next morning, Daniel asked, "What did you write in that star, son?" Noah looked up, hesitant. Then quietly, he said, "Forgive." Daniel's hand stilled. "Forgive who?" Noah didn't answer. He only handed Daniel a small, crumpled star from his coat pocket. Inside, written in tight, careful letters, "Forgive myself." That night, Daniel sat long after everyone else had gone to bed, holding the star between his fingers. He stared into the fire, then out the window, where stars pricked the sky like nail-heads in dark wood. He thought about the men he'd never forgiven, the ones who walked away when the mine collapsed, the version of himself who had done the same, walked away from love, from laughter, from life. And he thought of Noah, of that single aching word written in secret. Forgive. The idea took shape quietly. Rose was the first person he told. They sat on the porch while Hope slept in her arms, the wind brushing the tall grass with a whisper. "I want to do something," Daniel said. "For the kids, for the town, maybe even for us." Rose tilted her head. "What kind of something?" He looked out across the meadow. "A night where we write down what hurts us, what haunts us, and send it to the sky. Not to forget, but to release it." Rose was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled softly. Letters to the stars. The preparations were simple but heartfelt. Martha Miller donated parchment paper. Pastor Miller offered the churchyard. Daniel and Noah built wooden lantern frames using reeds and wax paper. Rose and the girls made soup and biscuits to share. They didn't call it a festival. They called it a night of letting go. Flyers were quietly handed out. No names, no obligations. Just one line. Bring your sorrow. Bring your wish. Let the stars carry it. The night came clear and cold. Families arrived in small clusters, hands in pockets, eyes uncertain. There were no speeches, no introductions, just tables lined with lanterns and pencils, and a small fire burning near the fence. Daniel stood beside it all, watching. One by one, people began to write. A mother who'd lost her son to illness wrote, "I miss you." A boy whose father never returned from war wrote, "Come home in my dreams." Martha wrote, "I forgive her," and didn't say who her was. She didn't have to. Rose knelt with Lila and June as they wrote in shaky letters, "Thank you for choosing us." And Noah, sitting cross-legged beside the fire, wrote only 2 words, "Still healing." When the lanterns were lit, they flickered like tiny hearts. One by one, they were released. Carried by heat and wind, they rose, slowly at first, then all at once, hundreds of glowing paper souls lifting into the sky. People cried, softly, silently. They held hands. They exhaled. And when Daniel finally let go of his own lantern, it bore no message, only a name written across the side. Eliza. It was the first time he had written it since the day he carved it into a gravestone. Rose moved beside him. She didn't speak. She only took his hand, threading her fingers through his like she'd always belonged there. Later, as the lanterns became stars themselves, dimmed by distance but not by meaning, Noah turned to the crowd, and without being asked, stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was clear. My mom used to say stars are wishes, he said. But now I think they're also stories. Pieces of us we send out so no one feels alone when they look up. The hush that followed was holy. That night, as they returned home, Daniel looked over the hill behind the cabin and saw the sky still dotted with flickering lights. Rose walked beside him, hope in her arms, her face illuminated by moonlight. "You did something good tonight," she whispered. "No," Daniel said. "We did." She looked up at him, eyes soft. "Do you believe in wishes again?" He looked down at her, then at the children dancing ahead, then back at the night sky. "I believe in the ones I can hold," he said, "and I believe some come true the long way around. It started quietly, as most beautiful things do. A faint glow in the west just after dusk, then a flicker, then a streak. 1, 2, 3. By the time the fourth meteor scratched its way across the night sky, the meadow behind the Kale cabin was filled with people. Word had spread about the lanterns, the paper stars, the boy who spoke of wishes that became stories. What began as a quiet gesture between a handful of souls had become something greater, a tradition, a night of remembrance, a night of release. Daniel didn't call it anything fancy. When Martha asked him what to put on the church bulletin, he'd simply said, "The night of falling stars." The field smelled of cinnamon and cedar. Small fires dotted the slope like constellations, surrounded by blankets and quiet conversation. The wind was soft, the kind of breeze that felt more like a sigh than a storm. Daniel stood near the edge of the hill, hope in one arm, his other hand wrapped gently in roses. The twins twirled nearby in dresses too thin for the cold, but no one dared stop them. Noah sat with a small group of boys his age, holding a paper star between his palms as if it were alive. "It's different this year," Rose whispered. "How so?" "Last year, people came to mourn. This year, they came to share." Daniel nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what healing looks like." Just before the meteors reached their peak, Pastor Miller stepped forward with a lantern in hand. "I won't preach," he said with a chuckle. "Not tonight. God doesn't need a pulpit to be heard, not when his handiwork is painting the sky." A warm ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. He looked up. "Each of us carries something, loss, joy, guilt, grace, and tonight, we don't bury it. We lift it. Together." One by one, lanterns began to rise, not as an escape, but as a celebration. Noah stood and walked slowly to the small wooden platform Daniel had built earlier that day. It was nothing more than a few planks and nails, but under the stars, it looked like a stage from another world. He cleared his throat. "This is my story," he said, voice steady. "I didn't talk for 3 years. I stopped because I was scared that if I spoke, the world would hear how broken I was." Heads turned, conversations hushed, but then a woman came with 2 girls and a baby inside her, and she brought something back into our house that I didn't know I missed. Light. His voice wavered slightly, but he kept going. "She wasn't our blood, but she became our family, and because of her, I found my voice again. And now, I want to use it to thank her." He turned. "Thank you, Rose." Rose gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Noah looked at Daniel. "And thank you, Dad, for not giving up on me, for letting love in again." Daniel couldn't move, couldn't speak. He didn't have to. Hope gurgled softly in his arms, and Daniel kissed her forehead. When the last lantern floated upward, Daniel stepped forward. He held no paper, no rehearsed lines, just a truth that had been simmering beneath his ribs for months. "I lost the woman I loved in the darkest winter of my life," he said. "And then, one stormy night, another woman knocked on my door. She was cold and tired, and carrying more than most hearts could hold. His voice trembled, but he smiled. She didn't save me with grand speeches or big promises. She saved me by staying, by listening, by calling my son by his name, by filling our home with sounds we'd forgotten. Laughter, lullabies, life. He looked at Rose. And now I know. I didn't just find her that night. I found my future. The meadow fell into stillness. Then Rose stepped forward, tears shining on her cheeks. I thought I was just passing through, she said, voice shaking. But then I realized, this hill wasn't the end of the road. It was the beginning. She turned to Daniel, one hand on his chest. This is where I was meant to land. The meteors came in clusters after that. One after another, falling like heaven's own chorus. People cheered. Others cried. Some simply looked upward, arms around the ones they loved, sending silent prayers into the dark. Daniel stood in the center of it all, hope still in his arms, Rose beside him, Noah at his side, the twins curled around his legs like roots. And for the first time in years, he didn't just feel alive, he felt complete. Later that night, long after the last lantern had disappeared into the sky, Daniel found a folded piece of paper tucked into the pocket of his coat. It was old, yellowed. The ink had faded, but the writing was still clear. It was Eliza's handwriting. If you ever find love again, let it in. Don't punish it for arriving after me. Let it grow. Let it stay. Let it be yours. He folded it carefully and placed it in the box of stars Noah had made. Then he turned back to the cabin, where Rose waited with sleepy eyes and a smile that warmed more than fire ever could. The seasons turned again. Spring melted into summer, and the hill grew wild with color. Daisies, bluebells, goldenrod. The garden rose planted behind the cabin bloomed in crooked rows, stubborn and full of life. Bees hummed at the windows. The creek bubbled, fat with melted snow. Even the trees seemed to lean inward now, as if they too had found something worth staying close to. And inside the cabin, life moved to the rhythm of warmth. Noah read aloud every evening, voice steady, eyes bright. The twins had started making up stories of their own, tales of star-kissed wolves and talking lanterns. Hope, now nearly walking, tottered barefoot through the kitchen like a tiny sunbeam, chasing dust motes and laughter. Daniel often caught himself smiling without realizing it. It wasn't the forced smile of a man trying to be okay. It was quiet, unplanned, the kind of smile that comes when a burden has been set down so long, you almost forget you ever carried it. One evening, just after supper, Daniel stepped outside alone. The sky was smeared with streaks of orange and plum, the air thick with honeysuckle and old song. He sat on the porch steps and watched the stars blink awake one by one. Behind him, he could hear the soft clatter of dishes, the lilt of Rose's humming, the twins' chatter, Hope's babbling, and Noah's gentle teasing. He exhaled slowly, deeply. This was home. Not the walls, not the roof, but the weight of belonging, the ease of love, the knowing you no longer needed to explain why you stayed, or who stayed with you. Later that night, Rose joined him. She brought 2 mugs of tea, handed one over, and sat beside him, their shoulders touching, their silence companionable. I remember, she said after a while, the night I showed up here. I was sure I'd broken something just by being alive, that I was too much and not enough all at once. Daniel looked at her. You weren't too much, he said softly. You were just right. She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you still talk to her? She asked, not unkindly. Daniel didn't need to ask who she meant. Sometimes, he said. But it's different now. I don't ask for permission anymore. I just tell her, thank you. For what? For teaching me how to love someone well enough to do it again. The next morning, a letter arrived by horseback, tied with a blue ribbon, sealed in wax. It was from the school board. Rose read it at the kitchen table, Hope bouncing on her lap, the twins trying to guess what it said before she'd opened it. When she finally unfolded the paper, her face lit like sunrise. "They want me to teach," she whispered, "in town, starting this fall." Daniel's eyebrows lifted. "That's wonderful." They said my name came up more than once. From the kids. Her eyes turned to the twins. "Someone told them I made a difference." June grinned. "We told them?" Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "You know what this means?" Rose said. "We won't be a secret anymore." Daniel's expression grew gentle. "We haven't been a secret since the first star fell." That weekend, Daniel took Noah fishing at the creek. It had become their ritual, just the two of them, a tin pail between them, sometimes catching more stories than fish. As they sat on the bank, feet in the water, Daniel turned to his son. "You're growing into a fine young man," he said. Noah looked up, blinking. Daniel hesitated, then added, "You're more like me than I expected. But better." Noah smiled. "That's 'cause I have both you and Rose." Daniel swallowed hard and ruffled his hair. "Lucky me." The night before Rose's first day of teaching, the family gathered on the hilltop. It wasn't a celebration exactly, just a moment. A pause in time. The twins brought a blanket and 2 jars of lemonade. Noah carried Hope, who giggled with delight at the feel of grass beneath her feet. And Daniel held something in his hands, a small wooden box, carved with stars. "I've been saving these," he said, opening the lid. Inside were dozens of folded paper stars, some written on, some not. Wishes from a darker time. Sorrows now softened by memory. Daniel handed the box to Rose. She looked at him. "I don't want to forget what brought us here," he said, "but I think it's time we let these go." One by one, they unfolded the stars, read them, remembered, and then tossed them gently into the creek below. Some floated. Some sank. All were released. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars blinked above, Rose turned to Daniel and said, "Do you think we'll always live here?" He looked around. The field, the cabin, the family they had built with bare hands and braver hearts. "No," he said honestly. "I think we'll live wherever the stars fall, because wherever you are, that's home." She smiled, took his hand, and beneath the same sky that had once held only silence, a new life continued, rich with color, sound, forgiveness, and the unshakable belief that love, once found, never truly leaves. It only changes form. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it knocks on your door one night, carrying twins and a heartbeat, and reminds you how to live again. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Whether you're tuning in from a quiet farmhouse, a bustling city, or a cozy corner with a warm cup of tea, you're part of something special here. If this story touches your heart, feel free to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. No pressure, just a gentle invitation to stay connected. And from all of us behind the scenes, thank you. Thank you for spending time with us, for listening with an open heart, and for believing, like we do, that kindness still has the power to change a life.